Your mother probably bought at least a dozen of these without thinking twice. They sat on the kitchen counter, in the pantry, in the back of the fridge, and nobody questioned a thing. Whole aisles of your childhood grocery store were stocked with products that would never pass inspection today. Some were pulled because of what they did to people. Others disappeared after the government finally caught up with what the ingredients actually were. A few hung on for years before a quiet recall made them vanish overnight. You remember the packaging. You remember the taste. But you probably never knew why they stopped showing up on the shelves. Here are 60 grocery items from the 1980s that are now banned. In 1987, High C took the juice world by storm with a citrusy green concoction that slimed its way into pop culture history, Ecto Cooler. Introduced as a tie-in to the real Ghostbusters cartoon, this fluorescent drink was a real liquid icon. Packaged with Slimer's mischievous grin splashed across the box, it became the ultimate lunchbox flex for kids. Bright green juice might not sound appetizing, but Ecto Cooler was surprisingly delicious, a zesty, tangy orange flavor that hid its true hue like a paranormal secret. Its success was no ghost story. Ecto Cooler rode the Ghostbusters wave into the 1990s, outliving the cartoon itself by nearly a decade. But like many pop culture phenomena, its time eventually ran out. By 2001, it was rebranded and quietly exorcised from grocery store shelves. Some say it was a victim of shifting trends. Others believe it simply outlived its supernatural charm. Fans weren't ready to let it go. In 2016, Coca-Cola revived Ecto Cooler for the Ghostbusters reboot, bringing Slimer and that citrusy kickback. It vanished again, but not before reigniting a wave of nostalgia. To this day, petitions and do-it-yourself recipes float around online, proving that Ecto Cooler still haunts the hearts of its fans. For a lot of families in the West, Lucky was the go-to store. It was big, clean, well-stocked, and, well, Lucky. You knew the logo the second you saw it. Bold red letters, no frills. Lucky was all about value without shouting about it. You could walk in, grab what you needed, and be out the door in under 15 minutes. No weird aisle layouts, no endless upselling, just groceries. And that is what made it so popular. In its prime, Lucky had hundreds of stores across California and neighboring states. It was the neighborhood spot, the place your parents sent you with a list and a few dollars. But then Albertsons came knocking. They bought Lucky out in the late 1990s and started rebranding everything. One by one, the Lucky signs came down. The name disappeared. Some stores stayed open, but the brand was gone. Albertsons thought it would be a seamless switch, but for longtime customers, it felt like erasing a memory. The name Lucky made a brief comeback years later, but it was not the same. Just a borrowed name without the spirit. If you ever carried a paper bag with the Lucky logo on it, you know what kind of place it was. Simple, dependable. And now, a ghost in grocery history. Government cheese was not just food, it was survival. It came in a giant, nondescript cardboard box, stamped like it was military surplus. Inside was a solid orange brick that could survive a nuclear blast. You could slice it, melt it, fry it, and it would still taste like school lunch and desperation. It never quite melted right. It stuck to pans, clumped in sandwiches, and turned casseroles into rubber. But when you had nothing else, it was gold. It made grilled cheese, it made macaroni edible, and it lasted forever in the fridge. Every poor kid in the 1970s remembers peeling back that thin paper and trying to cut a straight slice. You never got it right. It was always crooked, but that cheese kept you full, and that mattered more than anything. This was not grocery store cheese. This was a government-issued food safety net. It was part of a national aid program, and for many families, it was the difference between dinner and no dinner. It showed up uninvited, unbranded, and unforgettable. And when it was gone, you missed it, even if you pretended not to. These days, people pay top dollar for vintage processed cheese. Back then, it came free, and you still felt the cost. Jolt Cola was the 1980s in a can, loud, rebellious, and wired beyond reason. With the tagline, "All the sugar and twice the caffeine," it became the drink of choice for gamers, students, and anyone who thought sleep was optional. The pitch was simple. If coffee was too boring and soda too weak, Jolt would fix both problems, explosively. The neon red logo, the buzz of carbonation, and the rush of caffeine turned it into a cult classic overnight. Teachers hated it, parents feared it, and kids snuck it into backpacks like contraband. Some schools even banned it entirely after students showed up jittering through math class. Jolt's ingredients list read like a dare, packed with more sugar than a candy factory and caffeine levels that made even coffee blush. For a generation raised on excess, it was perfect, until regulators and doctors began sounding alarms about caffeine overload. By the late 1990s, new rules and changing health standards pushed it off many shelves, but its legacy lives on in every modern energy drink. Jolt Cola walked so Monster and Red Bull could sprint, shaking all the way. Stretching ground beef with oats or crackers was the ultimate survival hack for poor families in the 1970s. You could not always afford to put a full pound of meat on the table, but you could make it look like you did. Moms would crush up saltine crackers or stir in handfuls of dry oats, mixing them right into the ground beef before shaping patties or cooking meatloaf. Suddenly, 1 pound of hamburger could feed a family of 5, maybe even 6 if you had enough filler. The flavor? It was different, but not bad. Oats gave meatloaf a softer, almost spongy texture, while crackers added a salty bite that fooled kids into thinking it was all beef. Moms swore by the trick because it made suppers stretch and still feel hearty. Sometimes ketchup on top hid the filler completely, making it pass as a real dinner. Families even joked that the oats were the secret ingredient. Kids grew up thinking that was just what meat was supposed to taste like. The oats soaked up grease, making the meal heartier, while crackers added a salty crunch. Kids often did not know the difference. They just thought meatloaf always came with little white flecks in it. It was also practical. The filler stretched your dollar and made the dish more filling at the same time. Leftovers could be fried up again the next day, served with ketchup, or tucked into sandwiches for school lunches. Today, most of us think of filler as a downgrade, but back then it was ingenuity. Families who lived through that era still remember the smell of oats sizzling in ground beef and how it turned survival into supper. Hamburger helper was a staple in 1990s kitchens, but not everyone had the hamburger part. That was optional. The box said, "Just add meat." But the truth was, if you had a box and some water, dinner was already halfway done. The cheesy powder, the flimsy elbow noodles, the tiny spice packet, it was all designed to stretch whatever scraps you had into something hot and filling. No ground beef? You used beans. A little leftover chicken? You shredded it real small. And sometimes, you just skipped the meat altogether and hoped the sauce would do the talking. It was salty, it was starchy, it was magic if you were hungry enough. You could find it for under $1, and the serving sizes were always generous. You ate it with cheap bread or frozen vegetables, sometimes both. It was the kind of dinner you made without needing to think, and that was part of its power. It showed up when your family needed something easy, something cheap, and something that would last a couple of days. Hamburger helper without the hamburger was not glamorous, but it was comfort. And it reminded you how far a little food and a little grit could go. The campaign to replace natural fats with industrial ones did not start in the 70s. It started in 1911 when Procter & Gamble introduced Crisco, a product made by forcing hydrogen gas through cottonseed oil to turn a liquid into a solid. The process, called hydrogenation, created the trans fats later linked to hundreds of thousands of heart disease deaths. Crisco's marketing was ruthless. The company gave away free cookbooks to newlywed women, hired home economists to promote the product in cooking classes, and framed pure pork lard as old-fashioned and unsanitary. By the 70s, lard had nearly vanished from American grocery stores. What nobody disclosed was that lard is naturally rich in vitamin D, has a balanced fatty acid profile, and produces a flakier pie crust than any shortening ever could. Lard was safe. Its replacement was not. Canned horse meat was one of the strangest products you could find on a 1940s grocery shelf, yet it was marketed as a smart and affordable answer to beef shortages. World War II rationing had stripped stores of familiar cuts of steak and roast, and families needed protein wherever they could get it. Horse meat was not completely unheard of in parts of Europe, but for most American households, the idea felt shocking. Still, desperation has a way of changing tastes. Wrapped in a can, it looked no different than corned beef or luncheon meat. It was inexpensive, lasted for months, and was promoted as hearty food for families trying to stretch $1 and a ration book. Grocery stores stocked it beside other staples with plain, matter-of-fact labels that did little to hide what was inside. Mothers who would never have imagined cooking horse meat before the war suddenly served it in casseroles, stews, and sandwiches. The fact that it was practical and plentiful gave it a foothold, but it never felt normal. By the late 1940s, when beef returned to shelves, most families quietly dropped the habit and never looked back. Today, the very thought of canned horse meat feels unsettling, a reminder of just how much the war changed grocery shopping and how necessity pushed people to accept the unthinkable. In the 1970s, a whole wave of diet sodas promised a slimmer waistline without giving up fizzy sweetness. The secret was cyclamate, a chemical sweetener that slipped into lemon-lime cans and cola bottles with barely a mention on the label. People saw it as a miracle. Finally, soda, without the guilt. Cyclamate was cheap, effective, and had no bitter aftertaste like the sweeteners that came before it. Housewives stocked it in their pantries, teenagers gulped it after school, and it became the quiet backbone of the diet food craze. Then came the bombshell. Lab tests on rats showed shocking cancer risks, and overnight, something that once seemed like the future of soda became a headline about danger in your glass. Soda companies scrambled, shelves shifted, and the era of cyclamate came to a screeching halt. What was left was a mix of confusion and betrayal, because millions of Americans had already been drinking it daily without a clue. It is unsettling to realize how fast a trusted product can turn into something forbidden. Gerber Singles for adults was marketed as the perfect meal solution for lonely working grown-ups, and somehow that idea was even sadder than it sounds. Imagine sitting at your desk, spooning lukewarm beef burgundy or banana prune out of a baby food jar while pretending your life choices made sense. These jars were identical to what babies ate, only now you were supposed to feel sophisticated about it. The company promised portion control and convenient dining, but really it was just mashed sadness in glass form. The flavors were mushy, bland, and uncomfortably familiar, grown-ups rediscovering what it felt like to have no teeth and no dignity. Advertisers tried to spin it as modern efficiency, but even 1970s consumers had limits. Within months, store shelves cleared, not from demand, but from embarrassment. Gerber learned the hard way that adults do not want to be reminded of their infancy at lunchtime. The idea may have been practical, but it turned eating into an act of defeat. In the end, Gerber Singles became the punchline of a decade defined by weird convenience food, a baby step in the wrong direction. Few names in the 1920s grocery stores carried the familiarity of Lydia E. Pinkham. Her vegetable compound was marketed directly to women, a revolutionary tonic meant to soothe everything from monthly discomfort to the mysterious ailment of female hysteria. Housewives bought it as often as flour or sugar, keeping a bottle tucked discreetly behind the kitchen tins. The advertisement spoke with sympathy, depicting frazzled women transformed into serene homemakers after a few doses. What the fine print didn't mention was that the tonic was loaded with alcohol, almost 20% by volume. For many women of the time, it was one of the only socially acceptable ways to have a quiet drink without raising eyebrows. The sweet, herbal taste masked the burn, and the calming effects felt nearly instant. In an era that didn't often listen to women's pain, Lydia's smiling face on the label became a symbol of understanding, even if the science behind it was questionable at best. Some swore it truly helped, while others just enjoyed the way the world seemed softer afterward. It was the perfect blend of comfort, myth, and marketing. Today, it stands as one of the earliest examples of wellness culture in a bottle, equal parts remedy and rebellion. Wartime margarine with dye packets was another peculiar grocery item and one that confused children at the time. Because butter was so scarce and so prized, margarine became the everyday alternative, but it originally came in a stark white block. To make it resemble butter, companies included a tiny packet of yellow dye that homemakers had to knead through the margarine by hand. Some even recalled their children begging to help, squeezing the bag until the dye spread unevenly, leaving streaks of gold in the white. It was messy, tedious, and hardly appetizing, but it did the job of tricking the eye. Advertisements even promoted this ritual as fun for the family, though most parents rolled their eyes. It was a reminder that substitutes were the new normal, and appearances mattered more than taste. After the war, margarine finally became pre-colored, and few looked back fondly on those dye packets. Still, the memory remains one of the strangest details of wartime grocery shopping. Off-brand cereal in the giant bag was how you ate breakfast without going broke. It came in plastic sacks the size of a sleeping bag, and it always sat on the bottom shelf of the cereal aisle, because that is where the cheap stuff lived. No cartoon mascots, no prizes inside, just flakes or puffs or little rings with names like Toasty O's or Honey Nuggets. And if you were a kid, you learned quickly not to compare it to the real thing. It was all sugar and crunch until the milk hit, then it turned to mush in under a minute. You stirred fast, trying to catch the crispy part before it vanished. The marshmallows, if there were any, felt like little erasers pretending to be candy. But it still had that sweet smell when you opened the bag, and that was enough. Your mom would pour it into a big plastic container to make it look official. You knew the truth, but you played along. You learned to love it because it meant there was still something to eat before school. And sometimes, it really did taste good, especially when you were too tired to care. It got soggy faster, the sugar was uneven, and the marshmallows were few and far between. But when your parents poured it into a Tupperware container, it suddenly became just cereal. You ate it anyway, because it was sweet enough and it meant breakfast was handled for the week. That bag could last forever, longer if your siblings did not sneak extra bowls after school. You learned to crush the clumps and shake the dust to the bottom, and even if it never tasted like the stuff on television, it got the job done. You did not feel poor eating it. You felt like part of a family that knew how to stretch a dollar. Off-brand cereal was not something you bragged about, but it was something you depended on. And sometimes it even tasted better because it came with a little pride. Bacon used to be a Sunday treat, a crisp slice or two beside scrambled eggs and toast. It was greasy, smoky, salty magic, and affordable enough that you could throw it in a sandwich or wrap it around meatloaf without blinking. You bought a pack, you cooked half, and you ate the rest cold out of the fridge when no one was looking. That was the bacon tax. But these days, bacon is practically a luxury meat. A pack that used to cost $2 is now pushing $8 or even $10, and that is for the regular stuff, not the thick-cut, hickory-smoked artisan strips wrapped in gold foil. Grocery shoppers do double takes. Sales on bacon feel like Black Friday. People swap brands, skip it entirely, or portion it like rationed butter in wartime. You can almost hear the sizzling sound in the skillet crying over how much it cost to get there. Still, some refuse to give it up. Because bacon does not just taste good. It feels like something good. It feels like breakfast at home. It feels like comfort. You might buy less, use it slower, or save it for special meals. But deep down, you still crave it. And even at those prices, bacon still sells out. Ground beef was plastic butter tubs in the fridge were the universal sign of a poor kid's household in the 1970s. No family on a budget had real Tupperware stacked neatly in their refrigerator. It was always country crock, parquet, or blue bonnet tubs that had long since been emptied of margarine. The minute you lifted one out, you knew it was a gamble. You might get mashed potatoes, beans, leftover chili, or the dreaded mystery stew your mom had made by tossing in whatever was left from the week. Kids everywhere knew the disappointment of reaching for what you thought was butter for your toast, only to open the lid and find green beans floating in broth. These tubs never sealed perfectly, so the fridge often carried a faint smell of onions and gravy. yet families swore by them because they were free, durable, and endlessly reusable. They stacked easily in cupboards, filled with everything from lunches to cookies for road trips. Taking potato salad to a picnic? You brought it in a butter tub. Nobody batted an eye because that was normal. The bright yellow lids became part of the scenery of poor kitchens everywhere, reminding kids that when you had little, you made the most of everything. Few snacks captured the neon spirit of the 1990s quite like Planters cheese balls. These bite-sized, cheese-dusted orbs were a cultural event. Packaged in a bright blue canister that popped off store shelves, they practically begged to be grabbed during every grocery run. And once you opened that iconic foil seal, there was no turning back. The cheese dust was unstoppable. Your fingers were orange for hours, no matter how many napkins you used. Cheese balls were a perfect marriage of flavor and crunch. The texture was airy yet satisfying, and the sharp, tangy cheese flavor was impossible to forget. Their popularity extended beyond snack time. They became a staple at parties, movie nights, and anywhere a little extra flavor was needed. So why did they disappear in 2006? Planters never gave a clear reason, but some speculate it was due to declining sales as tastes shifted toward healthier snacks. Fans, however, refused to move on. After years of online petitions and social media campaigns, Planters briefly revived cheese balls in 2018, and they sold out faster than you could say cheesy goodness. Unfortunately, their comeback was short-lived, leaving us to wonder if the blue canisters will ever make another glorious return. Alpha Beta had one of the catchiest slogans of its time: "Tell a friend, tell a neighbor." And for a while, people did. This was the store with the alphabetically organized aisles. Yep, you heard that right. They actually tried to organize food in alphabetical order. Was it practical? Not really. Was it memorable? Absolutely. Alpha Beta was the kind of place that felt futuristic in the 1960s and 1970s. Sleek designs, big signage, and a vibe that made grocery shopping feel almost fun. You would walk in and see the whole week's meals laid out in order, or at least that is what it felt like. Parents liked the prices, kids liked the bakery samples, but behind the scenes, things were starting to crumble. Ownership changed hands. The brand bounced between corporations until it landed in the lap of Ukaipa companies, the same folks who merged it into Ralph's and Food 4 Less. Slowly, the Alpha Beta name vanished. By the late 1990s, it was basically extinct. Some old stores kept the layout. A few signs lasted a bit longer than they should have. But the name was gone. Just another store turned memory. And if you ever saw that old green and orange sign, you know exactly how weirdly charming it all was. Powdered milk was never a treat. It was a chore. You mixed it in a plastic pitcher, hoping the lumps would disappear. They never did. It smelled like chalk and tasted like a dare. If you drank it warm, forget it. That was a punishment, not a beverage. But it got poured into cereal, added to mashed potatoes, and stirred into baking mixes like it belonged. Because it had to. Milk was expensive. Powdered milk came in giant paper envelopes and lasted forever. Not because you loved it, but because it was always there. You stirred it with a spoon until your wrist hurt. Then you stirred it more. Your mom would say, "Let it sit, it tastes better cold." And somehow, she was right, kind of. It was used to stretch the real milk when you were lucky enough to have some. Half and half was not a fancy coffee blend. It was how you survived a dry week. Powdered milk showed up in food pantry boxes, in school kitchens, in battered community centers. It was dependable, it was disliked, and it was necessary. Today, it is mostly used for baking. But if you were poor in the 1970s, you drank it straight, and you learned to stop complaining. Olestra fat-free chips were the 1980s biggest snack food miracle, and one of its most notorious disasters. Marketed as a breakthrough for people who wanted all the flavor of fried chips without the guilt, Olestra promised to change snacking forever. You could eat as many chips as you wanted, they said, and never gain weight. The slogan might as well have been, "Eat fearlessly and pay later." The secret ingredient was Olestra, a fat substitute that your body could not digest. That sounded great on paper until consumers learned it also caused gastrointestinal distress. In plain English, that meant sudden, unstoppable regret. People stocked up, ate entire bags, and then learned firsthand why scientists should not play snack gods. Within months, news outlets were running horror stories, and Olestra became a household punchline. Even though the chips were technically safe, no one wanted to take the risk. The miracle turned into a warning, a symbol of how far companies would go to sell fat-free dreams. By the early 2000s, Olestra snacks were gone, remembered only by those who learned the hard way that some chips really do bite back. Rinsing out ketchup bottles with water was a trick every mom knew. You never threw away a bottle that still had red streaks clinging to the glass. Instead, you added a little water, shook it hard, and poured out the thinned-down liquid. Suddenly, you had instant tomato soup, a quick sauce for noodles, or just one more squirt for hamburgers. It was not about waste. It was about stretching every penny. Some moms handed kids a plate of watered-down ketchup spaghetti and called it sauce night. Others filled squeeze bottles with the thinned ketchup to keep hamburgers from feeling bare. It was never gourmet, but it kept meals from feeling empty. Even when kids made jokes about ketchup soup, they ate it without complaint because it was better than nothing. Families understood that every drop was worth saving. Kids sometimes wrinkled their noses when their tomato soup looked watery, but it still tasted like ketchup and salt, which was all most kids cared about anyway. Some moms even poured it into casseroles, adding color and flavor where the budget could not afford real tomato paste. This was the era when nothing was wasted. A few ounces of ketchup meant one more meal that tasted familiar, one more plate that felt complete. Looking back, it might sound funny to call watered-down ketchup soup, but for families in the 1970s, it was just another way of getting by with what you had. Hot, you either hated it, learned to tolerate it, or convinced yourself it was fine once it was cold. Dry milk in cardboard cartons was one of those things that sat on pantry shelves like an unspoken badge of struggle. You mixed it with tap water in a big plastic pitcher, stirred for what felt like forever, and waited for the foam to settle. It never tasted quite right. The color was just a little off, but it was there. It was milk, kind of. And when you could not afford the real thing, it kept your cereal from going dry. For a lot of families in the 1990s, this was not a backup. It was the only option. Fresh milk meant a trip to the store and several dollars you probably did not have. But powdered milk? That stuff lasted forever and worked in a pinch for everything from boxed macaroni to pancake batter. You learned to look past the taste. You stopped complaining because everyone else at school had milk and you were just glad to have something close. Moms mixed it with a little real milk to stretch the carton. Kids closed their eyes and drank it fast. And that little box in the cabinet reminded you what it meant to get by. It was weird, it was chalky, and it helped families survive. They sold it like a complete meal, but most of us just saw a box of dry noodles and powder and figured we would make it work. In the early 1960s, the American Heart Association released its first dietary guidelines, telling the country that butter caused heart disease, and within a decade, the butter dish had vanished from most American dinner tables. What replaced it was margarine, a factory-made spread loaded with partially hydrogenated oils that delivered trans fat directly into the arteries of every family that followed the advice. Margarine was not a health food. It was an industrial product that Procter & Gamble had originally developed for candle wax before pivoting to food when electricity made candles less profitable. By 1977, Americans were consuming an average of 7.3 pounds of margarine per person per year, each bite supposedly protecting their hearts. The FDA did not ban artificial trans fats until 2018, more than 4 decades after butter was declared the enemy. Butter had one ingredient, margarine had a chemistry set. The wrong one won. Margarine with color capsules may sound like a kitchen science project, but in the 1940s it was part of everyday grocery shopping. At that time, margarine was stark white, almost looking like a block of lard, because laws prevented manufacturers from selling it pre-colored to resemble butter. Instead, every package came with a small packet of yellow dye. At home, families had to knead the capsule into the margarine by hand until it turned into a golden shade close enough to pass for butter. Children were often given the job, squeezing and mixing the soft mass in a bowl, or even inside the package itself. Grocery stores promoted it as a patriotic choice, since butter was heavily rationed and dairy went to the troops. Housewives clipped recipes that used margarine in baked goods and frying pans, all while quietly wishing for the taste of real butter. The process of coloring margarine was both a chore and a ritual, a daily reminder of shortages that never seemed to end. To modern shoppers, the thought of buying a plain white block and hand-tinting it before spreading it on toast sounds bizarre. But to families of the 1940s, it was just another small sacrifice on the long road of rationing. It might sound unbelievable today, but many cans on supermarket shelves in the 1970s were actually sealed with lead solder. That means the metal holding the can together could leach dangerous particles right into the food you were about to eat. Beans, soups, fruits, vegetables, almost anything in a can carried that silent risk. Families opened those cans without hesitation, pouring dinners straight into pots or onto plates, never guessing the hidden hazard built right into the container itself. At the time, it was cheaper and easier for manufacturers to use lead in the sealing process, and no one questioned it. Slowly, science began catching up. Doctors started to connect the dots between mysterious health issues and the everyday products people used without question. The idea that the same cans you relied on to stretch a budget could be poisoning you from the inside out was a terrifying realization. By the late 1970s, regulations began tightening, and eventually, lead solder in canned goods was fully banned. It is chilling to look back and realize how close to danger everyday families really were. Swanson's canned whole chicken was proof that humanity will try anything once and only once. Picture this: you open a can, tip it upside down, and a pale, boneless bird slithers out with the texture of a wet towel. It was supposed to be a miracle of efficiency. An entire roasted chicken in one can, but it looked like something out of a horror movie. When it hit the plate, it made a sickening thud that echoed through kitchens like a warning. The skin had the look of melted plastic, the color of sadness, and the consistency of gelatin. Housewives gagged mid-dinner prep, while husbands pretended to be brave enough to taste it. Even the family dog, normally loyal and forgiving, took one sniff and retreated. The broth it came in was greasy, gelatinous, and vaguely alive, clinging to the chicken like regret. Housewives in the 1970s tried to make casseroles or sandwiches with it, but most couldn't get past the smell. Swanson insisted it was tender and flavorful, but photographs alone destroyed appetites nationwide. It was the kind of food you kept in your pantry only for the end of the world, and even then you might think twice. Opening one wasn't cooking. It was trauma in aluminum form. Somewhere between progress and punishment, this canned bird became the symbol of everything wrong with 1970s convenience dining. Before calorie counting and juice cleanses, there were bile beans, a tiny brown pill that promised health, beauty, and a balanced system. Sold in tins that looked more like candy boxes than medicine, they were proudly displayed in grocery stores next to real food. The idea was simple: clear out your insides, and everything else would follow. The ads claimed they made you bright-eyed and slender, two promises no one could resist in the Roaring '20s. People popped them like breath mints, chasing an ideal of youth and lightness that matched the age of flappers and fast cars. The problem was, bile beans were mostly a laxative. Their cleansing effects were immediate and unmistakable, which somehow convinced customers that they must be working. Friends recommended them like beauty secrets, whispering that they kept the complexion clear and the figure trim. Even men bought them by the handful, convinced good digestion was the key to charm. The truth is, these little beans were part of a larger obsession with purification, both inside and out. Everyone wanted to feel clean, modern, and scientifically healthy. Decades later, people still joke that the bile bean worked too well, leaving you lighter in ways no one intended. Soy Victory sausage was one of the strangest meats to line shelves during the 1940s. With real meat in short supply, companies blended soy flour, fillers, and scraps into sausages that were meant to stretch rations further. These sausages often looked the part, but once cooked, they revealed their odd texture and flavor. Many described them as rubbery or bland, but they were cheap and filling, and that mattered more than taste. The government promoted them as patriotic, urging families to embrace soy as a way to help win the war. Cookbooks included recipes that added onions, breadcrumbs, or herbs to improve the flavor. Families learned to slice them into casseroles or stews where the strangeness could be hidden. For many, it was their first real exposure to soy as food, and it stuck in memory as both peculiar and necessary. Soy sausages never became a beloved staple, but they were a symbol of sacrifice at the dinner table. Ramen noodles were the closest thing to a full meal for 20 cents. You bought them by the brick, and they stacked up in the pantry like edible building blocks. Boil water, drop it in, stir in the packet, and in 3 minutes, you had soup. Sort of. Sometimes the packet tore wrong and seasoning spilled all over the counter, but you scraped it up anyway. You knew every flavor by heart: chicken, beef, shrimp, and had your favorites ranked. If you were lucky, you had a slice of American cheese to throw on top. If not, you cracked in an egg and watched it swirl like magic. You ate it out of the pot, from a chipped bowl, or sometimes even from a coffee mug. You slurped, you burned your tongue, and you went back for another bite. It was the kind of meal that tasted better because you made it yourself. And no matter how old you got, it always reminded you of getting by. The broth was salty enough to wake the dead. The noodles were soft, cheap, and weirdly satisfying. You could dress it up with an egg, some vegetables, or just eat it straight out of the pot. Some kids crunched it up dry and ate it like chips. It was the ultimate survival food. College students and broke families alike swore by it. You did not eat ramen because it was trendy. You ate it because it was there. And when the cupboards were bare, it felt like a small victory. Hot, quick, and good enough to get you through the night. Ramen was more than a meal. It was a way to stretch $1 without stretching your dignity. Peanut butter was never just food, it was a backup plan. A peanut butter sandwich meant you could get through a school day or a late shift without cooking. You could spoon it straight from the jar, smear it on apples, or dip pretzels in it for a quick hit of salty sweet comfort. Jif, Skippy, or the crunchy store brand, you had choices, and they were all cheap. It was the first thing kids learned how to cook. It was the last thing in the cabinet before payday. It was protein when meat was too expensive and comfort when everything else felt too hard. It never needed heating, slicing, or planning. Just a spoon. And for a lot of us, it was the taste of survival with a little sugar on top. Today, one jar costs what two used to, sometimes more. The aisle has turned into a display of inflation, with jars climbing over $6, even higher for natural or non-GMO versions. You hold the jar and think, is it really worth it? And the answer is usually yes, because peanut butter still does everything. It still feeds kids. It still lives in lunchboxes and emergency kits. But now, it comes with a mental negotiation. You might skip jelly, you might spoon it slower, but you still buy it. Because peanut butter is still the one food that never let you down. It is just a little harder to afford that loyalty now. Coffee cans for storing flour or sugar were a sight you could find on any kitchen counter. Once the last spoonful of Maxwell House or Folgers was brewed, the metal can was scrubbed clean and filled with dry goods. The plastic snap-on lid kept everything fresh enough, and the can itself was nearly indestructible. Poor families stacked them on shelves, labeled with masking tape and marker to tell sugar from flour, rice, or cornmeal. No matter how many times they were washed, they always carried that lingering coffee smell, which sometimes flavored the flour if it sat too long. But nobody minded. It was thrift in action, and that mattered more than taste. Kids grew up recognizing the sound of those plastic lids popping open as part of the rhythm of cooking at home. They doubled as storage for nails, screws, crayons, or buttons, making them as much workshop and craft supplies as kitchenware. Lined up in neat rows, they became a badge of pride, practical, reused, and full of possibility. Buying new canisters was out of the question when every household already had a pile of coffee cans ready to go. Back in the 1970s, when innovation seemed to touch every aisle of the grocery store, Kraft Foods unleashed a quirky creation that left taste buds buzzing: Kugel-flavored peanut butter. This wasn't your average peanut spread. Kugel came in a rainbow of unusual flavors: chocolate, banana, cinnamon, and even vanilla. The jars were just as fun, sporting googly-eyed cartoon mascots that seemed to promise, "This isn't your mom's PB&J." For a brief moment, Kugel captured the hearts and sandwiches of adventurous eaters everywhere. Parents appreciated the novelty, while kids loved the sweet twist on a classic staple. Chocolate peanut butter on toast? Cinnamon peanut butter on apple slices? The possibilities felt endless. It was smooth enough to spread on bread, but thick enough to cling to a spoon for late-night snacking. Despite its charm, Kugel's time on shelves was short-lived. By the late 1970s, it had vanished, likely due to limited demand or an overcrowded peanut butter market. And while it never saw a true comeback, Kugel lives on in the memories of those who grew up with it, or in the wistful stories told by parents to their kids. If you lived in the Chicago area, Dominick's was practically family. It was not just a grocery store, it was your store. Founded in 1918 by Dominick DiMatteo, it grew from a family-run corner shop into a powerhouse chain that dotted neighborhoods across the city. The stores had that distinct red and white signage and a layout that always felt intuitive. You walked in and you knew exactly where to find the best deli deals or which aisle had the fresh bread. For years, Dominick's was about local flavor, Italian ingredients, regional products, a sense of place. Then Safeway came along. They bought Dominick's in the late 1990s and tried to turn it into something it wasn't: uniform branding, new suppliers, national product lines. It lost its Chicago soul. Customers noticed, sales dropped, and in 2013, Safeway made it official. They were shutting it down. All of it, the entire chain. Just like that, Dominick's was gone. A staple of city life, wiped out in one corporate decision. Today, some of those old buildings still stand, empty or repurposed. But if you ever bought your Sunday sauce ingredients at Dominick's, you feel the absence every time you pass one. Day-old bread was a hidden treasure hunt, if you knew where to look. Your mom had a favorite shop. It was not a bakery. It was the day-old bread store. Shelves of discounted loaves, bent buns, and broken bagels lined up like misfit toys. You grabbed what you could: white bread, wheat bread, hamburger rolls with one smashed side. You had to check for mold, sure, but you also found surprises: honey wheat, raisin swirl, hot dog buns in winter. The smell was amazing. The prices were even better. You could get 5 loaves for the cost of 1. At home, you froze most of it, ate the rest fast, toasted it, buttered it, grilled it. If it was dry, you made it into stuffing. If it was too far gone, it became breadcrumbs. Nothing was wasted. The bread store was not fancy, but it kept your lunchbox full. And in the 1970s, full was all that mattered. Red dye. Number 2 was the invisible villain lurking in nearly every 1980s candy aisle. It made cherries brighter, strawberries redder, and fruit punch practically glow in the dark. Kids loved it. Parents did not. In the mid-1980s, scientists began raising red flags, linking the dye to hyperactivity and even potential health risks. Suddenly, that bright candy color looked a little too radioactive for comfort. Companies scrambled to pull products, and supermarkets quietly replaced the neon reds with paler shades of safety. It was one of the first times America realized how much chemistry hid behind natural flavor. Red dye number 2 became a symbol of corporate denial and consumer awakening. By the time it was banned in food production, entire aisles had to be reformulated. Candies, cereals, drinks, all of them changed overnight. What once looked delicious suddenly looked dangerous. Still, for anyone who grew up in the 1980s, that bright, unnatural red remains unforgettable, a warning wrapped in nostalgia. Dogs were everywhere. They were cheap, they were filling, and they found their way into just about every dish you can imagine. Moms sliced them into casseroles, tucked them into macaroni and cheese, and fried them with onions for a quick skillet meal. A single pack could stretch across the whole week if you got creative. Kids loved them because hot dogs felt like a treat, even when they showed up 3 nights in a row. Some nights it was hot dog stew with potatoes and carrots floating around thin slices. Other times, hot dogs got baked into cornbread for what kids called surprise squares. Even breakfast was not safe. Chopped hot dogs ended up in scrambled eggs or omelets. They were the Swiss Army knife of budget cooking, always ready to save the day. Families still laugh about how many ways a hot dog could be reinvented. Hot dog stew, hot dog omelets, hot dogs baked into cornbread, nothing was off limits. They were a poor mom's secret weapon, inexpensive protein that kept everyone happy. And when payday was still a week away, hot dogs kept the family from going hungry. The taste of smoky, salty hot dogs sizzling in a pan became part of the soundtrack of the 1970s kitchen. It was survival disguised as comfort food, and somehow, it worked. It came in a plastic tray with a packet of powder, a slick pouch of sauce, and dreams of an actual meal. Maruchan yakisoba was the 1990s answer to, "I want takeout, but I have a $2 bill and an old microwave." These things were everywhere, from gas stations to discount grocery stores, and if you were broke, they felt like a big step up from a plain pack of ramen. Just add water to the fill line, microwave it until your house smelled like steamed plastic and soy, then stir in the sauce. The noodles were weirdly soft, the sauce was super salty, and the tray always burned your fingers. But it worked. It felt like an upgrade, like fast food's dollar menu came to your kitchen. For teens with no allowance or parents trying to keep grocery costs down, yakisoba bowls were a little moment of indulgence. They filled you up. They took no effort, and they made you feel like you were eating something with flavor, even if it was mostly sodium and MSG. Some kids ate these every day after school. Others lived off them in college. No one thought they were healthy, but no one cared. They were warm, filling, and just a little exciting, especially when you could not afford anything else. Full-fat whole milk was what the milkman delivered to your front porch in heavy glass bottles, cream rising to the top, cold enough to sweat through the cardboard carrier on a July morning. By the 80s, dietary guidelines pushed Americans toward skim, insisting the fat would clog their arteries. Schools banned whole milk from cafeterias entirely in 2012. The watery replacements were often loaded with added sugar to get kids to drink them. A study tracking nearly 5,000 children over 8 years found those who drank whole milk were 16% less likely to become overweight and 18% less likely to become obese. The fat in milk helps absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K, all of which are fat-soluble and essentially wasted without the fat that was being stripped away. The 2025 dietary guidelines finally reversed course. It took the government over 40 years to admit the milk your grandmother poured was fine. Cabbage-flavored gelatin salads may be one of the most baffling grocery products from the 1940s, yet gelatin companies proudly advertised them as modern and nutritious. Gelatin was cheap, filling, and easy to store, making it the perfect base for inventive recipes during rationing. Magazines and grocery pamphlets encouraged homemakers to mix shredded cabbage, carrots, and even onions into lime or lemon gelatin. The result was a wobbly, translucent salad that combined sweet, sour, and savory in one dish. These molded salads often took center stage at potlucks and family dinners, displayed proudly as if their strangeness was a mark of creativity. For families tired of the same boiled vegetables, it felt like a way to dress things up, even if the taste was questionable. Children poked at the quivering shapes with forks, never sure if it was dessert or dinner. Grocery aisles stocked flavored gelatin powders by the dozens, ready to be adapted into anything the rationing cook could imagine. What feels unthinkable now was once a symbol of pride, a dish that showed you could make something fancy out of next to nothing. Salad in a can was the era's saddest attempt at health food. Lettuce, dressing, and despair sealed tight in tin. Each can promised a fresh, balanced meal that could be stored for months, which should have been the first red flag. Once opened, you were greeted by limp, brownish leaves drowning in vinegar-scented goo. The smell hit first, a sharp metallic tang that made you question your life choices. The dressing had congealed into something resembling glue, and the lettuce was so wilted it practically begged to be buried. Advertisers posed models on picnic blankets holding open cans, pretending to enjoy it. The only thing fresher than the salad was the regret that followed. The tagline was "Salad for busy people," which really meant people who have given up. The taste was like sour dishwater with a hint of aluminum, and yet it was marketed with bright smiles and picnic scenes. It was meant to bring freshness to the shelf-stable revolution, but instead, it buried salad's reputation for an entire generation. Even cats turned their noses up at it. People quickly realized that lettuce, nature's most fragile food, did not belong anywhere near a can opener. In the age of innovation, this one proved that not everything needed to be preserved. Health, it seemed, was something you had to suffer through, one sticky piece at a time. With a name like swamp root, you might think people would hesitate. But in the 1920s, this bottle was a bestseller. Marketed as a natural tonic for kidney health, it claimed to cleanse the system and restore youthful energy. The label boasted an impressive list of roots, herbs, and vegetable extracts, though most of the healing power came from a generous splash of alcohol. Grocery stores proudly stocked it beside other household essentials, and advertisements described it as medicine for the modern man. People swore it helped with fatigue, back pain, and even melancholy. It was the kind of cure-all that thrived in an era when science and superstition overlapped freely. The name alone gave it credibility. If something came from nature, surely it must be good. Swamp root became part of daily routines, mixed with water, milk, or even poured over ice like a fine tonic. Looking back, it was less medicine and more metaphor, a reflection of how desperate people were for relief from invisible aches. They trusted what felt earthy and honest, even if it came from a bottle labeled swamp. Powdered gelatin desserts in odd flavors became another strange feature of the wartime pantry. While fruit-flavored gelatin had long been popular, the 1940s introduced savory flavors like tomato, celery, or even chicken. These powders were marketed as creative ways to stretch meals, turning leftovers into molded salads or aspics. Government pamphlets even included recipes for gelatin meat salads, showing off peas, carrots, and even hot dogs floating in wobbly shapes. Magazines praised them as thrifty, modern, and attractive, though many families quietly dreaded serving them. Children in particular were baffled, expecting dessert but finding vegetables inside. Homemakers were encouraged to suspend vegetables, meat scraps, or even fish inside jiggling blocks of gelatin, creating bizarre dishes that baffled children and guests alike. The idea was efficiency, nothing wasted, everything served. Cookbooks filled with recipes for salads that combined gelatin with mayonnaise, peas, and carrots, insisting they were both nutritious and elegant. In truth, they were strange, often unappetizing, and today they are remembered mostly as culinary curiosities. Few recipes from this gelatin craze survived beyond the wartime years, but the memory of tomato-flavored gelatin lingers as one of the oddest items ever sold in grocery stores. Hot dogs in bulk packs were the easiest way to feed everyone without spending more than a few bucks. You could get 10, sometimes 12, for just a couple of dollars, and they came wrapped in plastic so thin it felt like you could tear it just by looking. They were not all beef. Sometimes they were barely meat, but they were food. Boiled, fried, grilled. If you had a stove, you had a plan. Kids would eat them with ketchup, adults with mustard, and some just straight out of the pot. You sliced them into mac and cheese and called it dinner. You cooked them on a fork over the stove burner like you were camping indoors. They made the house smell like lunch no matter what time it was. They were quick to make and quick to disappear. And if the pack ripped in the fridge, you still used them anyway. They showed up in beans, sliced over instant mac and cheese, or tucked into a slice of store-brand bread. You knew they were not great, but they were quick, salty, and filling. And when there were leftovers, they sat in a little plastic container, waiting to be reheated. Bulk hot dogs were not a delicacy. They were a utility. And in a house where the grocery list was always longer than the budget, they were a lifeline. Hot dogs in bulk kept the fridge from looking too empty, and for that, they earned their spot. Off-brand soda in 2-liter bottles was the ultimate loophole. It tasted close enough, fizzed just fine, and cost a fraction of the name brands. For birthday parties, barbecues, and lunchroom trades, those big, bold-colored bottles were a lifesaver. Cola, orange, grape, take your pick. You could buy 4 for the price of 1 Coke and no one really complained. Now those same 2-liter off-brand sodas are over $1, sometimes close to $2. And the name brand versions? Practically luxury items. Suddenly generic is not so generic in price anymore. The shrinkflation is real too. Less fizz, smaller necks, faster staleness. And yet the price keeps rising, like we are all pretending these bottles were always worth that much. It used to be a safe grab at the checkout line. Toss in a bottle, no guilt, no stress. Now you catch yourself calculating how many cups you will actually get out of it. Off-brand soda once made cheap feel cheerful. Now it is just another product that forgot why people loved it in the first place. It still sits on the bottom shelf, but not quite as proudly. Bologna ends from the deli were the mystery meat of childhood in poor households. At the end of the slicer's work, when the big log of bologna was too short to fit properly, the store sold the leftover ends at a discount. Families lined up for them, taking home bags of odd-shaped chunks. They were fried in a skillet, stacked between bread, or diced into casseroles. Sometimes the slices were thick and uneven, curling up in the pan like little cups of grease. Other times they were mashed into sandwiches with mustard, a meal that felt like a feast even though it cost pennies. Kids complained, but they ate every bite because meat was meat and bologna was king in a poor kitchen. Families stretched those ends as far as they could, using every scrap in lunches and dinners. It was cheap, salty, and filling, which was all that mattered. Today, it might seem funny, but for kids in the 1970s, the taste of fried bologna ends was unforgettable. Once upon a time, in the enchanted ovens of the Keebler elves, there emerged a cookie that was part treat, part treasure, Keebler Magic Middles. Introduced in the 1980s, these cookies were nothing short of a snack-time masterpiece. From the outside, they looked like your standard shortbread cookie, but one bite revealed the magic. A gooey, decadent center filled with either creamy chocolate or buttery caramel. It was like the elves had figured out how to bake happiness into every bite. Magic Middles quickly became a fan favorite, beloved for their unique texture and indulgent flavor. The contrast between the crumbly outer shell and the warm, molten filling made them feel like a gourmet treat, even if you were eating them straight out of the bag in front of the TV. Despite their popularity, these little treasures disappeared in the mid-1990s. Keebler has never given a definitive reason, but some speculate that production costs or shifts in consumer trends were to blame. Fans have been calling for their return ever since, even launching petitions and social media campaigns. Sadly, the elves seem to have retired this recipe for good, leaving us with only sweet memories, and maybe a little hope that one day, magic might strike again. In the night, Waldbaum's was a New York classic. If you know, you know. It started as a single store in Brooklyn way back in 1904 and grew into a beloved regional chain, especially across Long Island and the boroughs. Walking into a Waldbaum's felt like entering a true neighborhood store. The produce was stacked high, the fish counter was loud, and there was always that one employee who knew your mom by name. They had their own bakery, their own coffee, their own sense of rhythm. Waldbaum's was not flashy, but it was familiar, and that was the magic. But behind the scenes, things got messy. Ahold, the Dutch parent company of Stop & Shop, took over, and things started changing fast. Stores were remodeled, employees were shuffled, and the heart of Waldbaum's got lost in the shuffle. By the time bankruptcy hit in the mid-2010s, it was over. The chain collapsed. Stores closed. And just like that, a New York institution was gone. People still talk about it. They remember the smell of the bakery and the weekly circulars that showed up in the mailbox like clockwork. Now, all that is left is memory, and maybe an old reusable bag buried in someone's garage. Canned Spam was the meat that needed no fridge and barely needed a reason. You popped the lid with a key or your finger and slid out a jelly-covered block of mystery. You sliced it thin, fried it hard, and drowned it in mustard. It was salty, greasy, and so processed it almost squeaked. But it was meat. It filled sandwiches. It topped rice. It bulked up macaroni. You flipped it like pancakes on a hot skillet and called it dinner. Some people said it was gross. Others called it a lifesaver. You probably called it fine. It was not your favorite, but it was there when you were hungry. Spam came in food boxes, sat on sale shelves, and stayed in pantries for months. It was cheap, it was shelf-stable, and it worked. That was the whole point. You were not buying sirloin. You were feeding 4 people with 1 can. It showed up at family breakfasts and potluck casseroles. Some people hated it. Others made it a tradition. But if you were broke in the 1970s, Spam was meat, and that was enough. Tab soda was the drink that defined a decade, and then paid the price for it. Introduced by Coca-Cola for calorie-conscious drinkers, it came in that unmistakable pink can with a promise: 0 sugar, 0 guilt, all taste. The secret weapon? Saccharin. A sweetener that seemed like a miracle until science caught up. When studies linked saccharin to cancer in lab animals, panic spread faster than fizz. Health warnings appeared on cans, and sales plummeted as consumers fled from what suddenly felt like a soda-sized science experiment. Despite the controversy, Tab hung on as a cultural icon, the drink of fashion models, aerobics instructors, and anyone chasing the new body craze of the 1980s. But by the 2000s, Coca-Cola quietly pulled the plug. The soda that once symbolized empowerment had become an outdated reminder of a risk people no longer wanted to sip. In the end, Tab wasn't just a drink. It was a time capsule of a decade obsessed with control, beauty, and the illusion of safety. Saving bacon grease in a coffee can was practically law in poor households. Every time bacon hit the skillet, moms poured the leftover fat into an old tin can by the stove. It hardened into a cloudy white block, ready to be scooped out for the next meal. Bacon grease replaced butter and oil, frying potatoes, eggs, bread, and even vegetables. The flavor was unbeatable. Everything tasted smoky and rich. Some moms even bragged that their secret ingredient was not seasoning, but yesterday's bacon. Bacon grease made cornbread moist, gave green beans depth, and turned fried potatoes into pure comfort food. If you asked kids from that era, they would swear bacon grease was better than butter. It felt like getting more than one meal out of the same strip of bacon. Even when money was gone, that can on the stove meant dinner still had flavor. It was frugality at its finest, turning scraps into something valuable. Kids knew the sight of that can on the stove meant dinner would have flavor, no matter how bare the pantry looked. It was a poor mom's secret weapon, one that kept food filling and delicious when butter was too expensive to buy. There was something about peeling back that freezer door and seeing that brick-shaped 5-pack of frozen burritos sitting in the frosted corner. You knew exactly what dinner looked like that night, and probably lunch the next day too. These were not gourmet. They were barely identifiable as burritos sometimes. A smear of bean, maybe a whisper of cheese, all wrapped in a tortilla that got hard on the edges no matter how long you microwaved it. But they were cheap. Dirt cheap. Less than $2 for 5 of them, and they filled you up faster than anything else in the frozen section. Kids could make them on their own. Parents could stretch them into a side dish, add a little salsa if they had it, maybe slice one open and pretend it was something more than what it was. The freezer always had a pack or two tucked behind the ice cubes. And somehow, no matter how bad they tasted, they hit the spot. Especially after school or on nights when money was too tight for takeout or even pasta. These burritos were survival food. They were microwave staples for latchkey kids and broke college students. They were dependable in a way fancier food could never be. You might not have bragged about them, but you were grateful. Before the war on fat changed American cooking, beef tallow was the default oil of the country. Your grandmother rendered it from roast drippings, stored it in a coffee can by the stove, and fried potatoes that turned golden and crisp in a way vegetable oil never could. McDonald's cooked their legendary fries in beef tallow until 1990, and longtime customers still say the flavor died that year. What the guidelines overlooked was that nearly half the fat in beef tallow is oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat celebrated in olive oil. The stearic acid in tallow does not raise LDL cholesterol the way other saturated fats do. A whole generation traded a stable, natural cooking fat for industrially extracted soybean oil processed with hexane, a petroleum-derived solvent, and called it progress. Powdered eggs became a staple of wartime kitchens, tucked into tins and boxes that looked almost medicinal rather than appetizing. Fresh eggs were scarce, often shipped overseas to feed soldiers, and families at home had to make do with substitutes. Powdered eggs were simply dehydrated yolks and whites, mixed into a fine powder that could be rehydrated with water. Housewives whisked them into a pale yellow batter and fried them as scrambled eggs or folded them into cakes and puddings. The texture was never quite the same, often grainy and flat, but it was still protein on the table. Grocery stores sold them in bulk, sometimes with government pamphlets explaining how to use them. Children grew up eating powdered eggs without knowing what fresh eggs really tasted like, and for many, the first bite of a real fried egg after the war was unforgettable. Though they disappeared from shelves after rationing ended, the memory of powdered eggs stuck around as a symbol of both sacrifice and ingenuity. Today, they are mostly linked with camping supplies or military rations, but in the 1940s they were simply breakfast. Few food scares hit as hard as the PBB disaster in Michigan during the 1970s. A mix-up at a chemical plant sent polybrominated biphenyls, or PBBS, into cattle feed, and before anyone realized it, the meat hit grocery store shelves. Entire families were unknowingly buying toxic beef, cooking it up for dinner, and feeding it to their children. For months, the contamination spread quietly, with no warning signs at the butcher counter. When the truth came out, it was nothing short of a nightmare. Thousands of cattle had to be destroyed, and trust in local meat all but collapsed. The scandal was so severe it pushed lawmakers to tighten food safety rules across the country. For the people who lived through it, the memory is not just about bad beef. It is about betrayal, about realizing the system that was supposed to protect them had failed. To this day, PBB contamination stands as one of the darkest food safety stories in American history. Jimmy Dean canned bacon burgers took America's obsession with fast food and combined it with the worst parts of canned meat. The pitch sounded appealing. Burgers ready anytime, anywhere. The reality was a soggy puck of ground beef swimming in fat, sealed up like a crime scene. Opening the can released a smell so foul it could clear an entire kitchen in seconds. The bacon bits, if you could call them that, looked like something scraped off a griddle in defeat. Frying them only made things worse. The grease multiplied like a monster from a horror movie. It was food that hissed back at you when cooked. Each can contained a smell that could strip wallpaper. The bacon was barely identifiable. More mush than meat, more memory than flavor. Yet somehow Jimmy Dean insisted this was a revolution in convenience. People popped open cans expecting a cookout, but what they got was a smell that lingered for days. The 1970s were all about pushing limits, but this went too far. A burger so processed it was practically a science experiment. Opening one felt like betrayal. Eating one felt like punishment. It didn't take long for consumers to realize that no meal worth eating should clang when it hit the plate. 1920s, before anyone truly understood what health supplements should or shouldn't contain, the Violet Ray Health Elixir was all the rage. It came in a small, elegant glass bottle, the kind that made you believe it must hold something miraculous inside. Advertisements promised vitality, vibrance, and vigor, all from a tonic that shimmered faintly purple under the light. People swore by it, claiming a few sips could lift fatigue, cure sadness, and sharpen the mind. Of course, it also contained a surprising blend of alcohol and lithium, ingredients that likely did something, just not what the label promised. Housewives kept it beside the vinegar and flour, and it wasn't unusual to see it sitting right on grocery counters next to olive oil and baking soda. It was part of the decade's obsession with scientific wellness, where every bottle seemed to promise the modern cure for the human condition. Doctors warned that such elixirs did little more than tingle your tongue and lighten your wallet, but that didn't stop people from sipping away. In a time when life felt faster and more uncertain than ever, the violet ray's sparkle offered a strange comfort. Looking back, it might have been more placebo than potion, but for many, that violet glow was hope in a bottle. Mock banana extract was a curious invention that speaks volumes about shortages in the 1940s. With imported bananas cut off during the war, Americans had to say goodbye to their favorite tropical fruit. But clever chemists came up with a substitute: flavoring made from plants like fig or banana squash, bottled and sold as mock banana extract. It was meant for baking, so pies, cakes, and puddings could still carry a hint of banana taste, even if no bananas were in sight. The flavor was strange, sharp, and not quite right, but for families desperate to hold on to familiar recipes, it became a fixture in pantries. Homemakers swapped tips on how to blend it with sugar or vanilla to mask the odd aftertaste. Children who grew up with it often said it tasted fake once they finally had a real banana again. Still, in its moment, it was a small miracle, something to bridge the gap between loss and normalcy. Today, the idea of fake banana made from fig extract sounds odd, but back then, it was a strange solution to a very real problem. Day-old bread from the discount bin was how you got through the week without breaking the bank. It sat in a big wire rack shoved into the back of the store near the milk or the freezer section. Bags marked down, smushed and stamped with a red sticker that screamed, "Today or never." You picked through the stack hoping for something soft enough to survive a few more lunches. Sometimes you got lucky and found a name brand. Other times, you took what you could get. White, wheat, hot dog buns. It did not matter. It all cost half as much and fed just the same. You could buy 3 loaves for the price of 1 and freeze 2 like you were planning ahead. The crusts were sometimes dry, but you trimmed them off and kept moving. French toast, stuffing, croutons, you found creative ways to use every last slice. Even the heels got their moment, usually pressed flat in a grilled cheese. It was not about freshness, it was about function. Your mom would freeze some to make it last, then toast the slices back to life. You could taste the dryness, sure, but you got used to it. With enough peanut butter, jelly, or soup to dip it in, it worked fine. Nobody bragged about eating it, but nobody turned it down either. It was not glamorous, but it was dependable. And when money was tight, day-old bread was still fresh enough to matter. You learned that value does not always come from a soft crust or a sell-by date. Sometimes it comes from knowing how to stretch what you have. The hero of the grocery cart. You could get a pound for a couple bucks, stretch it into tacos, meatloaf, spaghetti sauce, sloppy joes, or burgers for a family of 5. It was dinner on autopilot. You browned it, seasoned it, and hoped no one noticed how little meat there actually was. And somehow, it worked. Today, ground beef is a budget buster. You are lucky to find a pound under $6, and that is usually the fatty kind. The kind that shrinks in the pan and leaves half a cup of grease behind. You catch yourself eyeing chicken thighs or vegetarian options just to avoid the sticker shock. Even the marked-down meat bins are not what they used to be. And for folks who grew up on Hamburger Helper and Taco Night, that feels like a punch to the gut. Ground beef was supposed to be the cheap stuff. Now it is something you plan for, something you stretch even further. And if you are buying the good kind, grass-fed, lean, organic, you are treating it like filet mignon. We used to shape it into meatballs with our hands. Now we check the price per ounce with our calculators. Funny how a pound of ground beef can weigh so much more now. Glass peanut butter jars reused as cups were another trademark of poor family kitchens. Brands like Skippy and Jif often sold their spreads in heavy glass containers that doubled as drinking glasses once emptied. Mothers washed them out carefully, peeled off the labels, and suddenly you had a set of sturdy cups. Kool-Aid, sweet tea, or plain tap water tasted just as good out of a peanut butter jar as it did out of any fancy glassware. Some jars even came with printed designs, cartoon characters, or logos that made them more fun than anything store-bought. Kids claimed their favorites, and God help you if a sibling drank out of your peanut butter glass. They rattled in dish racks, thick enough to survive endless drops, and often outlived real glasses that broke in a year. Families never wasted money on drinkware when they were essentially handed out for free at the grocery store. They were heavy, practical, and often mismatched, but that was part of their charm. Guests drank from them without complaint because everyone had them, and everyone understood. In poor households of the 1970s, those jars were proof that nothing useful ever went to waste. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Nestlé had kids everywhere asking, "What's in the Wonder Ball?" This chocolate-coated mystery treat was a real adventure. Each hollow ball of milk chocolate was filled with tiny candy surprises, and unwrapping it felt like opening a treasure chest. The candy inside came in fun shapes and themes, from cartoon characters to animals, making every Wonder Ball feel like a personalized gift from the candy gods. But it wasn't just the candy that made Wonder Ball memorable. It was the sheer excitement of the unknown. The foil wrapper and colorful box promised a surprise every time. For kids, it combined two irresistible things: sweets and toys. However, the fun came to a halt in 1997 when Nestlé pulled Wonder Ball off shelves due to safety concerns. The small candies inside posed a choking hazard, and for a time, the concept of mixing food and surprises became controversial. Fans were thrilled when it made a comeback in 2000 with candy instead of toys inside, but the magic wasn't quite the same. Eventually, the Wonder Ball faded again, leaving behind fond memories of a sweeter, more adventurous time in snacking history. Red Owl was one of those stores that just felt classic. The name, the owl logo, even the storefronts had a kind of charm that you do not see anymore. It started in the Midwest and quickly became a staple across states like Minnesota and Wisconsin. The design was simple: bold colors, clean aisles, and friendly workers who actually said hi when you walked in. You could grab your milk, your meat, and a copy of the local paper all in one trip. For years, Red Owl thrived. It was dependable. Small enough to feel local, big enough to feel modern. But like many chains, it could not outrun the tidal wave of national brands and discount superstores. By the late 1980s, most Red Owl locations had been sold off or rebranded under new names. The final nail came when SuperValue phased out the brand entirely. Stores were stripped of the owl, signs came down, and neighborhoods lost something special. Red Owl disappeared so quietly that some people still do not know it is gone. But if you ever stood in a checkout line with that little red owl smiling back at you from your grocery bag, you remember, and you miss it. Off-brand cereal in a bag was not cool, but it was affordable. No cartoon mascots, no box, no toy surprise, just a giant plastic sack of crunchy shapes that looked almost, but not quite, like the name brand. Fruity Circles instead of Fruit Loops, Corn Crunch instead of Corn Pops, Marshmallow Magic instead of Lucky Charms, and every flavor was a little off. You poured it into a bowl with powdered milk and called it breakfast. It got soggy fast. It stuck to your teeth. But you still ate 2 bowls and called it a good morning. Moms bought it because it lasted a week and cost less than a movie ticket. You ate it because it was sweet, kind of. It came in huge bags that barely fit in the pantry. You clipped it shut with a clothespin and prayed for freshness. The marshmallows crumbled, the flakes broke, but it fed the whole house and nobody dared waste it. In the 1970s, off-brand cereal was not shameful. It was smart. And if you were lucky, it even came in chocolate. Kinder. Surprise eggs were the perfect balance of joy and danger. A hollow chocolate egg wrapped in foil, it hid a tiny plastic capsule inside. And inside that, a surprise toy. It was pure childhood wonder in edible form. The problem? American law does not allow non-edible items hidden inside food, especially small ones that can choke a child. Customs agents began confiscating Kinder eggs by the thousands, calling them contraband candy. Kids in Europe enjoyed them freely, while American children could only dream or smuggle them from relatives abroad. Parents protested, collectors cried foul, but safety laws won. In the US, Kinder eggs were banned entirely, replaced years later by a safer, separated version, Kinder Joy. Still, for those who remember the original, nothing compares to the thrill of cracking open an egg and finding both chocolate and a toy, a forbidden combination too perfect for its own good. Canned fruit cocktail was the definition of dessert for many 1970s families. It came in syrupy juice, packed with diced peaches, pears, grapes, and the occasional bright red cherry. Moms would pour it into a glass bowl, and suddenly it looked fancy. Served chilled, it became a treat at Sunday dinners or holidays when real fresh fruit was too expensive. Kids loved fishing out the cherries first, leaving the pears behind for unlucky siblings. Some families stretched it further by mixing the syrup into cake batter, turning a cheap can into an entire dessert. Others layered it with Jell-O, calling it salad, and serving it proudly at potlucks. Even poured over plain pound cake, it felt like something special. Kids knew it was not real luxury, but it was sweet, colorful, and exciting enough to feel like one. Fruit cocktail was proof that a can opener could make magic. The syrup doubled as a sweet sauce, poured over cake, or stirred into Jell-O. For families who could not afford pies or ice cream, fruit cocktail felt like luxury. It was sweet, colorful, and affordable. A little can of joy in a tight budget world. You opened the cabinet, grabbed the can with the plain label, and hoped today's batch had a little more meat than the last. Generic canned chili was a poor person's feast in the 1990s. Thick, sloppy, a little mysterious, and always hot. It came in a dented can with a no-name brand, and the ingredients list was vague at best. But it was food. You poured it over rice or crushed up saltines into it. You spooned it over a baked potato if you had one. Some people ate it cold straight from the can. The texture was questionable, the flavor was heavy on spice and light on substance, but it stuck to your ribs. You got a full stomach for about $1, and that was all that mattered. If you had cheese, great. If you had hot dogs, even better. But if all you had was the can, that was still enough to feed a hungry mouth. It became a go-to dinner on cold nights, a quick lunch before the second shift, or a last-minute fix when there was nothing else. Canned chili never tried to be fancy. And maybe that is why it earned a quiet kind of loyalty. It was always there when you needed it. Walk into any American supermarket in the mid-'80s and the dairy aisle was a wall of low-fat and fat-free yogurt. Each container dyed a cheerful fruit color and sweetened with enough sugar to rival a candy bar. Full-fat yogurt had been shoved aside by the same dietary guidelines that condemned butter, whole milk, and eggs. Without fat, yogurt tasted like sour paste, so manufacturers compensated with corn syrup, modified food starch, and artificial flavors. Some low-fat yogurts contained more sugar per serving than a glazed donut. Full-fat yogurt, meanwhile, kept you satisfied longer, contained conjugated linoleic acid linked to reduced body fat, and promoted the absorption of every fat-soluble vitamin in the meal. Multiple studies have since linked full-fat dairy consumption with a lower risk of metabolic syndrome, the cluster of conditions that includes high blood sugar and excess belly fat. What grocery stores sold as a diet food was, nutritionally, closer to frosting. Canned ox tongue might sound like a dare today, but in the 1940s it was sold as a practical and respectable source of protein. Rationing pushed families to embrace cuts of meat that had once been overlooked or even avoided. Grocery stores carried tins of ox tongue alongside canned hams and corned beef, presenting it as perfectly ordinary. The meat was usually pre-cooked, sliced, and packed in brine, ready to be served cold on sandwiches or warmed in stews. For many families, it was an affordable way to put meat on the table when better cuts were gone. Its rich, chewy texture was not to everyone's liking, but recipes and community cookbooks gave ideas on how to season and serve it. Government messaging praised it as thrifty, nutritious, and patriotic, encouraging shoppers to set aside squeamishness in favor of practicality. Children often did not even realize what they were eating until much later, when the name finally registered. Today, canned ox tongue feels more like a curiosity than a grocery staple, but during the war years it was a normal, if unglamorous, part of the diet. They seemed like the perfect treat, a hollow chocolate egg with a toy hidden inside. For kids in the 1970s, it felt like opening two presents at once, a sweet snack and a surprise you could play with after. Kinder. Surprise eggs came from Europe, but quickly found curious fans in the United States. Parents saw them as harmless fun, and children begged for them at every grocery trip. The problem was buried inside that chocolate shell. The small plastic toys were a choking hazard, and reports of accidents sent regulators into action. Suddenly, what once felt like magic was now a banned item in American stores, though it continued overseas without interruption. It left many American kids with a sense of missing out, especially when friends or relatives from abroad brought them back in suitcases. For those who tasted one before the ban, the memory is bittersweet, a symbol of childhood joy that was taken away almost as quickly as it appeared. How could something so simple be both delightful and dangerous at the same time? Snack pack meat. Pudding might be the most cursed phrase ever printed on a label. In an age obsessed with efficiency, someone decided dessert cups should also double as dinner. The result was a smooth, meat-flavored paste in those same foil-topped tins that once held chocolate and vanilla pudding. The moment the lid peeled back, an unholy smell escaped, beefy, metallic, and faintly sweet. The texture was worse, a thick gray sludge that clung to the spoon like an insult. Even desperate dieters couldn't stomach more than a bite before surrendering. The marketing photos tried to make it look elegant, but nothing could make beef pudding glamorous. Flavors like beef gravy delight and chicken spread haunted grocery aisles for a short but horrifying season. People didn't know whether to eat it warm, cold, or throw it out immediately. The idea was protein on the go, but the experience was regret in every spoonful. Texture-wise, it sat somewhere between cat food and wet cement. It was marketed toward busy homemakers and bachelors, which should have been a warning in itself. By the time the first batch expired, even dogs were saying no. Snack pack meat pudding was an invention that asked, "What if dinner didn't have to be chewed?" and answered, "Because it absolutely should." Imagine a time when vitamins tasted like the sea, and then someone thought candy could fix that. In the 1920s, cod liver oil was the miracle supplement, rich in vitamin D and thought to prevent everything from rickets to gloominess. The problem? The taste was dreadful. So clever candy makers decided to disguise it. Cod liver oil candies hit grocery shelves wrapped in cheerful paper, promising health through sweetness. Parents rejoiced, convinced they'd finally tricked their children into taking medicine willingly. But kids weren't fooled. The moment the sugary coating melted, that unmistakable wave of fishy flavor hit hard. Still, mothers insisted, "It's good for you!" And kids chewed bravely, grimacing through every bite. The candies were a symbol of the 1920s faith in progress, that even the worst-tasting cure could be tamed with a little innovation. Ironically, the oil often lost its potency once mixed with sugar, making them more novelty than nutrition. Yet the memory stuck. Ask anyone who grew up then, and they'll tell you about that one candy that smelled like the docks, but came in a pretty box. Victory Coffee Substitute was a bitter reminder of shortages made from roasted chicory root, barley, or other grains. Real coffee beans were scarce, and Americans had to accept that their morning cup would not taste the same. Grocery shelves stocked jars of this substitute, advertised as rich and satisfying, though few agreed. Some ads even claimed it was healthier than coffee, boasting that it was easy on the nerves and ideal for families. Homemakers were encouraged to brew it proudly, as though drinking it was a patriotic duty. For many, it became less about taste and more about keeping up a comforting ritual. Many said it tasted burnt or earthy, with none of the warmth that real coffee provided. Still, it gave people something hot to drink, and the ritual mattered more than the taste. Families drank it with milk or sweetened it with precious sugar to mask the bitterness. Some soldiers overseas grew used to it and drank it even after the war, but most abandoned it the moment real coffee returned. Victory coffee substitutes were strange, unwelcome, and unforgettable, tied forever to the sacrifices of the 1940s. Tuna in oil was not glamorous, but it got the job done. The can hissed when you opened it, the smell hit fast, and the texture was somewhere between firm and suspicious, but you ate it anyway. It was cheap protein and it came ready to use. Mixed with mayonnaise, piled on crackers, or dumped into noodles, it stretched far. Some people drained the oil, some stirred it in. Either way, you made it work. It was the kind of smell that lingered in the kitchen, but not in a bad way. You could eat it warm, cold, or room temperature, depending on how desperate you were. When lunch money ran out, tuna salad became the backup plan. You never needed a recipe, just a fork and whatever was in the fridge, and somehow it always tasted better the next day. It was salty, fishy, and weirdly rich, but it filled you up. Tuna salad sandwiches were a whole week's worth of lunches. You just had to ignore how oily your fingers felt after opening the can. There was no name brand snobbery. Whatever was on sale went in the cart. You ate it because you needed to, and sometimes because you kind of liked it. Tuna in oil might not have been the most appetizing thing in the pantry, but it was always there when you needed something fast and filling. Eggs used to be a default, always in the fridge, always in the budget. You could grab a dozen for less than $1 in the 1980s, and even into the early 2000s they felt affordable. They were breakfast, they were dinner, they were dessert. Scrambled, fried, baked into cakes, or boiled for sandwiches. No one really thought about the price of eggs because they were just there. They were dependable. Now, not so much. Prices have doubled, even tripled, depending on the year and your zip code. It is not unheard of to pay $6 or $7 for a dozen, and that is not even the organic kind. Suddenly, eggs are the kind of item you compare per unit, per store, and per brand. That cheap protein? Not so cheap anymore. You stand in the dairy aisle doing mental math and wondering how something so basic got so expensive, and yet you still buy them. Because you have to. Because they do everything. They are glue for baking, power for breakfast, and comfort in a pan. There was a time when eggs were what you added to stretch the budget. Now they are the thing that might break it. Powdered drink mixes in recycled jars were another staple of poor kitchens. Kool-Aid, Tang, and the cheaper off-brand packets were mixed into old pickle jars or mayonnaise jars, usually with a handwritten label taped to the side. Mothers would dump in the powder, stir it with sugar, and store it in the fridge to save time later. The faint smell of vinegar often lingered in those jars, so your fruit punch sometimes carried a tang that did not belong. Kids gulped it down anyway, because sweet drinks were a treat no matter what. When guests came over, pitchers on the table were rarely new. They were jars that once held pickles, pasta sauce, or peanut butter. Nothing was wasted, and every container found a second life. The bright red or orange liquid inside was enough to make a poor kid feel like royalty, even if it was little more than sugar water. In the 1970s, recycled jars filled with cheap drink mix were the closest most families got to luxury beverages, and everyone remembered them with a mix of fondness and a laugh. Sometimes the strangest ideas become cult classics. Take Hubba Bubba soda, for example. Yes, a bubblegum-flavored soda. Launched by the makers of the popular Hubba Bubba gum in the 1980s, this drink had the audacity to turn our expectations upside down. Imagine the sweet, chewy taste of bubblegum in liquid form. It was a fizzy pink concoction that somehow made perfect sense in a world where kids were always chasing the next big flavor. Whether you loved it or didn't quite know what to make of it, one thing was clear. Hubba Bubba soda was unforgettable. The product's bright pink hue and distinctly sugary taste made it a hit with adventurous soda drinkers, though it was as much a curiosity as a drinkable treat. For a brief moment, this quirky product was part of the 80s pop culture landscape, lining shelves right alongside other iconic products like Fruit Stripe gum and Crystal Pepsi. Sadly, like many eccentric 90s concoctions, Hubba Bubba soda vanished, likely due to limited demand and the challenge of maintaining that bubblegum flavor in a carbonated drink. Despite occasional whispers about a comeback, it hasn't returned. Grand Union was a strange mix of luxury and down-to-earth utility. One part grocery store, one part time capsule. At its peak, Grand Union had hundreds of stores, mainly in the Northeast. You could find one nestled between a laundromat and a video rental shop, a real slice of suburban life. They were clean, quiet, weirdly sophisticated for a neighborhood chain. Their in-store branding was sharp, dark tones, modern fonts, minimalist signage. It made your weekly shopping feel a little fancy. Grand Union was not flashy, but it had a loyal customer base. People trusted it. But behind the clean aisles and good service, the company was falling apart. Mismanagement, competition, multiple bankruptcies. Every attempt at a comeback just fell flat. By the early 2000s, Grand Union was bought, sold, and eventually dismantled for parts. The last few locations were converted into other stores, and the name disappeared. No farewell ad, no thanks for the memories. Just silence. If you ever clipped a Grand Union coupon or grabbed dinner rolls from their bakery, you probably feel like a piece of your hometown vanished. Because, well, it did. Fruit Roll-Ups' original recipe were the ultimate lunchbox upgrade, a sticky sheet of fruit-flavored fun that promised real fruit taste. In reality, it was closer to edible plastic coated in corn syrup. The first generation of Fruit Roll-Ups, launched in the 1980s, came loaded with artificial dyes, synthetic flavors, and enough preservatives to outlast civilization. Kids loved peeling them off wax paper, stretching them into shapes, and pretending they were eating something healthy. Parents convinced themselves they were fruit. The truth? They were sugar sculptures, with a shelf life measured in decades. When health watchdogs started questioning the ingredients, the company quietly reformulated the recipe. Less dye, fewer chemicals, more fruit concentrate. The newer versions looked cleaner but never tasted quite as wild. The original, in all its neon, sticky glory, disappeared, banned by shifting health standards and evolving food laws. But if you remember licking red dye off your fingers in 1985, you were part of an era that mistook chemistry for cuisine. Making Kool-Aid with half the sugar was a hack every mom tried. The instructions called for a full cup, but sugar was expensive and had to last. Moms dumped in half and stirred, hoping kids would not notice. The result was tangy, sour, and often puckered lips at the first sip. Still, it was cold, colorful, and sweet enough to count as a treat. Some kids loved the tart taste and grew up thinking Kool-Aid was supposed to make you squint. Others begged their moms to sneak in a spoonful of extra sugar, but the answer was usually no. Moms stretched every packet as far as possible, even reusing empty jars to store the mix. No one cared about perfection. It was about having a cold glass of something sweet on a hot day. The fact that it was slightly bitter only made the memory sharper. On hot summer days, kids lined up at the pitcher without complaint, even if the drink tasted more like lemon water than fruit punch. It stretched one packet further and kept sugar supplies alive a little longer. For moms in the 1970s, it was not about flavor perfection. It was about making sure there was enough to go around. Frozen pot pies were the warm, slightly questionable answer to dinner in the 1990s if your budget was low and your freezer was full. Chicken, turkey, beef, whatever the flavor, it all kind of tasted the same. Salty gravy, tiny cubes of meat, a few peas and carrots, and that soggy, crispy crust combo you never quite figured out. But it was filling. It was hot. And it made you feel like you had a real meal on the plate. You could find them for under $1 each, sometimes on sale for even less. They took forever in the oven, but if you had the time, they were worth the wait. Microwave versions existed, but they always came out mushy. Parents bought them in stacks. Kids learned to love them out of necessity. And somehow, that little aluminum pie felt like a win on a hard day. It was not good food, but it was good enough. And for people getting by on tight margins, good enough was the gold standard. Liver was once the most respected cut at the butcher counter, and your grandmother probably served it pan-fried with onions at least once a week. Beef liver, chicken liver, they were cheap everywhere and considered essential for growing kids. Then the cholesterol panic hit, and organ meats were swept off the American table along with every other food that contained dietary fat. What disappeared from the national diet was the single most nutrient-dense food on the planet. A 3-ounce serving of beef liver delivers over 700% of the daily value for vitamin A, more than 1,000% of B12, and significant amounts of folate, iron, and copper, all in bioavailable forms the body absorbs far more efficiently than any supplement. The cholesterol in liver turned out to have minimal impact on blood cholesterol for most people. An entire generation was told to avoid the most nutritious item at the grocery store. Victory Garden seed packets were not just a product, they were a patriotic mission sold right from the grocery aisle. Posters urged families to grow their own vegetables, and grocery stores stocked colorful packets of seeds beside the flour and canned goods. Carrots, beans, lettuce, and tomatoes were among the most popular, and entire neighborhoods planted backyard or community plots. These gardens helped relieve pressure on the national food supply while giving families fresh produce during a time when grocery shelves were thin. Children were taught to tend rows of beans and pull weeds, and the harvest became a point of pride. For many families, it was the first time they had ever grown their own food, and it created habits that lasted long after the war. Grocery stores proudly displayed the seed packets as if they were as important as bread or milk. Shoppers who bought them were told they were doing their part for victory, and that sense of contribution mattered deeply. Today, the bright vintage packets feel nostalgic, but in the 1940s they were symbols of resilience and survival. Summer in the 1970s meant sticky fingers, melting popsicles, and neon colors that seemed to glow under the sun. Those eye-catching shades often came from azo dyes, a class of artificial colors that gave treats their unforgettable brightness. Kids loved the electric blues and fire engine reds, and parents rarely questioned what was behind them. At the time, bright colors were marketed as fun and harmless, the kind of thing that made summer feel magical. Few realized those same colors were the result of chemical shortcuts rather than natural ingredients. The truth, however, was less cheerful. Studies began linking certain azo dyes to hyperactivity in children and potential long-term health risks. What had once been sold as harmless fun turned into a controversial additive under fire. Regulators eventually banned several of these dyes, forcing companies to dial back the neon glow of childhood. For many who grew up then, the memory of those rainbow popsicles is tied to long afternoons and sticky smiles. But beneath the nostalgia lingers an unease. If something so simple could be banned, what else in the freezer carried risks we never knew about? Jell-O savory flavors were the culinary equivalent of a dare. Celery, tomato, and mixed vegetable, words that should never be followed by gelatin dessert. In the 1970s, homemakers were told to mold everything, so Jell-O thought, why not salad? The result was wobbly towers of confusion served proudly at luncheons. Each bite felt like betrayal. Cold, rubbery vegetables suspended in sweet goo. The tomato flavor tasted like spaghetti sauce that lost its will to live, while the celery one just crunched wrong. People tried to convince themselves it was classy, cutting into it with forced smiles as children watched in horror. Even the family cat refused samples. The flavor was as bad as it sounds. Imagine slurping a cold tomato soup that fights back. Even worse, these mixes were often paired with tuna, olives, or boiled eggs suspended like fossils in lime slime. Magazine ads called them innovative. Dinner guests called them a cry for help. Every bite was a journey through texture and poor judgment. Jell-O proved that not all foods should jiggle, and certainly not ones that tasted like vegetables and regret. Before it became the comforting bedtime drink we know today, Ovaltine began as a rather suspicious malt extract tonic. In the 1920s, it was advertised as a nutritional miracle for delicate children and tired mothers. The early version was thick, syrupy, and tasted more like molasses medicine than chocolate milk. Families kept bottles of it in their cupboards, dosing children before school in hopes it would build strength and sharpen the mind. It was part of a wave of malt-based health foods that promised vital force to a generation still recovering from the First World War. Mothers believed it could turn picky eaters into hearty ones, and kids tolerated it for the reward of a sweet aftertaste. The ads featured rosy-cheeked children running through fields, supposedly powered by science and malt. What people didn't realize was that early Ovaltine had a fair share of sugar and barely any vitamins. Still, it symbolized hope, modern nutrition in a bottle. Over time, it would evolve into the familiar powder drink, shedding its medicinal image for something cozy. But in the 1920s, Ovaltine was less comfort and more cure, proof that even progress could taste a little strange. Dehydrated soup bricks were another strange but practical item from wartime grocery stores. These compressed cubes or rectangles contained dried vegetables, bouillon, and grains, ready to be boiled into soup. They were promoted as a miracle of convenience. Just drop one into water and dinner was served. Some even came with patriotic names like Victory Soup, promising both comfort and efficiency. Community cookbooks suggested adding scraps of onion, potatoes, or cabbage to make the broth heartier. For many families, these bricks became a way to turn almost nothing into something that could feed a crowd. The texture and taste were far from gourmet, but families welcomed the ease. They often added scraps of meat, potatoes, or garden vegetables to bulk up the meal. Children remembered the bricks dissolving into murky broth with an odd smell, but it was warm and filling. For soldiers and civilians alike, they became a familiar staple. Today, we have instant soup powders and packaged mixes, but the old bricks feel almost medieval. They were practical, strange, and a symbol of a world learning to stretch every resource. Cream of mushroom soup was not just a soup, it was an ingredient. It came in a tiny can, thick and beige, with chunks you tried not to think about. You added it to casseroles, mixed it with rice, poured it over chicken, anything to stretch a meal. It had one job: make plain food feel like something more. It was salty, gloopy, and strangely comforting. Even if you hated mushrooms, you still ate it. Some people thinned it out with milk, others dumped it in straight. It looked questionable in the pot, but came out of the oven like magic. You scraped the dish clean because there was never quite enough. That can was the base of a dozen meals and half your childhood. And every pantry had at least one hiding in the back, just in case. Because this was not about taste, it was about making things go farther. It turned leftovers into dinners and empty pans into something that looked finished. Your mom probably had a dozen recipes with it, all of them created out of necessity. And somehow it always made the meal feel like it had more to it. Cream of mushroom soup was not about flavor. It was about survival with a little warmth on top. Green in a tub was the cheaper answer to butter, and for a long time it stayed in its lane. It spread easily, kept forever in the fridge, and came in tubs big enough to last all month. You could bake with it, fry eggs in it, melt it over vegetables, or slather it onto toast. Some people swore by it. Others just could not afford anything else. Either way, it got the job done. For years, you could get a whole tub for under $1. Now that same tub is pushing $3, and if you go for a buttery spread or something with olive oil, forget it. You are still getting oil and flavoring, but paying like it is whipped gold. The ingredients have not changed, but the price sure has. The basic brands that once saved you money are now neck and neck with store-brand butter, and that makes it harder to justify. For a while, margarine felt like a recession-proof staple, something you could count on in lean times. But today, it feels like you are being charged more for settling. It still lives in fridges across America, but now it comes with a side of frustration. When even margarine feels expensive, you start to wonder what cheap even means anymore. Store-branded ice milk instead of ice cream was the closest poor kids often got to dessert. True ice cream cost more, but ice milk came cheaper, often in large cardboard tubs. It was thinner, less creamy, and melted faster. But to kids, it was heaven. Spoons clinked against bowls as kids piled it high, often doused in chocolate syrup or sprinkles to mask the lack of richness. The flavor sometimes tasted watered down. but when it hit your tongue cold and sweet, you did not care. Families celebrated birthdays and holidays with ice milk, treating it like the finest dessert in the world. It was a compromise, but one that made sense when money was tight. Every poor kid remembered crowding around the freezer, hoping there was still a scoop left in the tub. For many, that ice milk was the taste of childhood. In 1992, Pepsi made a bold move to redefine soda. Enter Crystal Pepsi, a clear cola that promised to deliver the same cola taste, but with an unexpected twist: no artificial color. It was as if Pepsi had looked into the future and decided, why not make cola look as clean as the space-age tech we all dream about? The result was a crisp, almost citrusy version of the familiar cola flavor, which had many wondering if clear was the new black. The sleek, transparent bottles seemed to scream, "The future is now." The product became a marketing sensation, tapping into the early 90s fascination with all things futuristic. It was everywhere, on TV, in stores, and even tied to a high-energy advertising campaign with Van Halen's hit song, "Right Now." Fans lined up for a taste, but not everyone was sold on the idea of clear soda. Some even compared the taste to a cola-flavored lemon-lime drink, which didn't sit well with traditional cola lovers. Despite its buzz, Crystal Pepsi was discontinued in 1993 due to lower-than-expected sales. Fans, however, refused to let go. After years of petitions and internet campaigns, Pepsi brought it back briefly in 2015 for a limited-time run. Colonial stores had one of the most charming logos ever: a little rooster perched on a basket. It was Southern grocery pride at its finest. Operating mostly in the Southeast, Colonial was clean, friendly, and community-centered. You went there for your staples, your Sunday roast, your after-church snacks. Then in the 1970s, it morphed into Big Star. Same chain, new name. The rebranding felt bold: shiny red letters, sleek store layouts, a little more polish, and it worked. For a while. But like so many others, Big Star could not keep up with the changing grocery landscape. Mergers, competition, and economic shifts slowly chipped away at its footprint. One by one, the stores were bought out or closed. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Big Star was fading fast. Some became Harris Teeter, others got picked up by Kroger. But that old-school charm? Gone. You will not find a Big Star logo anywhere today. But if you ever walked those clean, bright aisles with your mom or grabbed a candy bar at checkout, the memory sticks with you. It was the kind of store that knew its customers, and we lost that. Canned Vienna sausages were soft, salty, and kind of weird, but they worked. You popped the lid and pulled out a row of pale, jelly-covered mini hot dogs packed tight in mystery water. They smelled like a meat factory and looked like baby food for adults. But you ate them cold with crackers or fried them in a pan and called it breakfast. They were cheap, portable, and weirdly satisfying. Each sausage was the size of your finger and had the consistency of room-temperature butter. You could not slice them without squishing them, but you did anyway, because they were meat, and meat was meat, especially when money was tight. You found them in discount stores, food pantries, and packed in your lunchbox when there was nothing else. They did not require refrigeration, which made them a pantry MVP, and no matter how questionable they looked, you were always glad they were there. They came in pop-top cans with paper labels that peeled off in the heat, and no matter how many times you gagged at the first bite, you always finished the can. They lasted forever in the cupboard. They showed up during hurricanes, blackout dinners, and those long weeks before payday. Canned Vienna sausages were not loved, but they were there. And when you had nothing else, that was enough. Aspartame heavy diet drinks ruled the 1980s like artificial royalty. Every company wanted in on the low-calorie craze, and aspartame was the magic word, sweeter than sugar, with zero guilt. But behind the fizzy slogans and pastel cans was a growing storm of controversy. The commercials made it look glamorous, thin models sipping soda on beaches and boardwalks, living proof that chemistry could be chic. But reports of strange side effects, headaches, nausea, dizziness, began to spread. Health watchdogs accused companies of putting profit before safety, and suddenly 0 calories didn't sound so refreshing. Reports of headaches, dizziness, and long-term health concerns turned the miracle sweetener into a national debate. Diet sodas that once promised vitality suddenly felt toxic, their ingredients lists sounding more like chemistry homework than refreshment. Regulators scrambled, companies reformulated, and loyal fans were left wondering if their favorite drinks were safe or secretly sinister. By the end of the decade, aspartame was under tighter scrutiny, forcing soda makers to reinvent themselves again. For those who remember the first wave of diet drinks, it was an era defined by blind faith in science and the rude awakening that followed. Reusing bread bags as freezer bags was just common sense. Nothing got thrown away, not even packaging. Moms washed out the empty plastic bags, dried them, and used them to wrap leftovers, freeze meat, or pack sandwiches for school lunches. Twist ties got reused too, bent and straightened until they snapped. For poor families, it was not just about saving money, it was about respecting every scrap of material. Opening the fridge or freezer meant seeing stacks of food tucked into bread bags with the labels still on them. Kids did not know what brand name freezer bags even looked like until much later. Some moms even sewed little cloth ties to make them last longer. It was not glamorous, but it was practical, and practicality meant survival. What others might see as trash, poor moms turned into tools. Plastic was precious, and every bag stretched the budget a little further. Kids opened their lunchboxes to find sandwiches wrapped in bread bags, not brand-name storage bags, and that was normal. It was not waste. It was wisdom. Looking back, it is easy to see the brilliance in something so simple. It did not need a can opener. It did not drip oil on your hands. Pouch-packed tuna was a quiet revolution in 1990s poor kitchens, a protein that was cheap, shelf-stable, and weirdly convenient. You could eat it straight from the pouch or mix it into whatever was lying around. Macaroni, rice, salad, crackers, tuna made it work. No draining, no mess. Just rip it open, squeeze it out, and stir. Some pouches were plain. Others came seasoned, maybe with lemon or pepper if you were lucky. But no matter the flavor, the idea was the same. Cheap fish that lasted forever and fed whoever was hungry. It was a step up from canned tuna because it felt a little easier, a little faster. You could keep a few in your backpack, your desk, even your glove compartment. People surviving on food stamps knew the value. Students and single parents kept it on standby. And even though it kind of smelled like cat food, it packed protein that helped you get through the day. It was weird, it was reliable, and it reminded you that survival sometimes came in a soft silver pouch. You did not need a... The American Soybean Association ran full-page newspaper ads in the late 1970s warning consumers about the saturated fat in tropical oils, and the campaign destroyed coconut oil's place in the American grocery store almost overnight. Coconut oil vanished from shelves, replaced by domestically produced soybean oil in everything from cookies to crackers to movie theater popcorn. The science behind the attack relied on studies that used highly processed, partially hydrogenated coconut oil, a product chemically altered to behave nothing like the virgin coconut oil that Pacific Islanders had been cooking with safely for thousands of years. A 2020 review in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that virgin coconut oil does not raise LDL cholesterol compared to habitual diets. One trade group's advertising campaign rewrote the American pantry for 40 years. Spam with recipe booklets was one of the defining grocery experiences of the 1940s, blending convenience with a dash of government persuasion. Spam had been around since the 1930s, but wartime rationing turned it into a cultural mainstay. Grocery stores sold tins of the pink, salty meat packed with small leaflets of recipes endorsed by government nutritionists. These recipes showed how to transform Spam into casseroles, stews, and even mock roasts, all in the name of making limited supplies stretch further. Families leaned on it heavily, and children grew up with Spam sandwiches in lunchboxes and fried Spam for dinner. For many, the recipe booklets became stained and worn from repeated use, almost like a trusted family cookbook. Though some people groaned at its monotony, Spam was reliable, cheap, and filling. qualities that mattered more than taste. When rationing eased, some families eagerly abandoned it, while others carried on the habit for years out of comfort and nostalgia. Spam may have been mocked in later decades, but in the 1940s, it was the backbone of many dinner tables. Bread has always been a staple in American kitchens, but in the 1970s, even something that simple carried hidden risks. Farmers used mercury compounds to treat seeds, protecting crops from fungus before planting. The problem came when trace amounts of those chemicals made their way into harvested grain and, eventually, into bread. Families slicing into a fresh loaf had no idea they were taking in something toxic. For decades, bread was considered one of the safest, most reliable foods, so the idea that it carried invisible danger shook people deeply. It forced families to question whether the government was truly protecting their most basic foods. It was not the kind of hazard you could taste or smell, but the damage was very real. Mercury exposure carried serious health risks, and the discovery sent shockwaves through food safety circles. Once the link was clear, the practice of using mercury seed treatments was banned outright, closing the door on one of the most unsettling chapters in everyday food history. For many who lived through it, the idea that even a slice of bread could be unsafe still feels shocking. Bread was supposed to be the most dependable food of all. Tang breakfast cereal was what happened when someone took the phrase "part of a complete breakfast" far too literally. The famous orange drink powder got a crunchy upgrade because apparently drinking it wasn't enough. It came in small, sugary nuggets that promised the flavor of sunshine and delivered the taste of battery acid. The first crunch was shocking, sharp citrus with a metallic aftertaste that burned like orange cleaner. Within seconds, the cereal disintegrated into orange foam, turning milk into a radioactive sludge. Kids dared each other to finish a bowl, while parents quietly questioned humanity's progress. Even Tang's creators pretended it never happened. Pouring milk over it turned breakfast into a chemical experiment. The milk fizzed, the cereal melted, and nothing about it felt safe. Kids were curious once, parents never twice. NASA may have used Tang in space, but this version belonged in the trash. It was sweet, sour, and somehow both dry and sticky. The only thing this cereal fueled was regret. Tang tried to conquer breakfast twice, once as a drink, once as a disaster, and both times it left a bad taste in history. Postum was the anti-coffee for a world that couldn't stop drinking it. Invented as a healthier alternative, this caffeine-free beverage made from roasted grains was supposed to calm nerves, aid sleep, and purify the body. Its dark color and rich aroma fooled many at first sip, but the flavor, somewhere between burnt toast and sweet syrup, was unmistakably unique. The 1920s were a decade obsessed with self-control, and Postum fit perfectly into that narrative. Advertisements warned that caffeine led to nervous breakdowns and irritability, convincing families that real coffee was a moral hazard. So, grocery stores stocked Postum by the case, and mornings across America began to smell just a little less exciting. Housewives poured steaming mugs for their husbands, hoping to keep them calm, while children were told it was the smart person's coffee. It became a kind of household virtue, a sign that you cared about your health, even if you secretly missed the kick of caffeine. Looking back, Postum feels like the ultimate symbol of early wellness marketing, a blend of good intentions, questionable taste, and the eternal promise of self-improvement. Canned tripe was another 1940s grocery item that feels unusual today. Tripe, the stomach lining of cows, was inexpensive and high in protein, making it a wartime staple. Canned versions appeared on shelves, marketed as ready-to-cook or pre-cooked convenience meals. Some recipes suggested frying it with onions or stewing it with tomatoes, trying to make the chewy texture more appealing. Immigrant families who were already familiar with tripe often embraced it, but for others, it was a jarring new addition to the dinner table. Advertisers tried to market it as hearty and wholesome, but no slogan could make it popular with kids. Ads promoted it as traditional, nutritious, and thrifty, even though many Americans had never eaten it before. Recipes for tripe stew or fried tripe appeared in community cookbooks, showing how homemakers adapted to make it palatable. The texture was chewy and the flavor polarizing, but families learned to live with it. Some immigrant communities already enjoyed tripe, but for many others, it became a strange necessity of the times. Once the war ended, canned tripe quickly disappeared, leaving behind memories of one of the most unusual proteins of the decade. Frozen mixed vegetables in a brick were the colorless cornerstone of many meals. They came in a solid block, vacuum-sealed into plastic that had seen better days. Carrots, peas, corn, green beans, all stuck together in a frosty lump. You had to slam it on the counter just to break it up. Boil it, butter it, serve it beside meat that needed help. No one was excited, but no one complained either. They added something healthy to the plate, or at least colorful. Even if the texture was weird and the carrots always too soft, it was better than nothing, and that was enough. And when you stirred them into soup or casserole, you barely noticed them at all. Frozen veggie bricks were not exciting, but they checked a box and made a meal feel just a bit more balanced. Store-brand American cheese singles were the cheapest cheese you could buy. Plastic-wrapped slices that melted like magic and turned any sandwich into comfort food. You used them on grilled cheese, cheeseburgers, or even scrambled eggs if you were in a mood. You used to get 20 slices for under $2. Now the same pack costs over $4 and feels thinner than ever. It tears when you peel it, it sweats when it is warm. But you still buy it because it makes the food feel like home. You stand in the aisle comparing slices, wondering if it is worth going generic again. Spoiler: even the generics are not cheap anymore. Cheese singles used to be filler food. Now they are another reason your grocery total feels like rent. Generic cola in black and white cans was a true mark of poor shopping trips. The plain white can with blocky black letters simply said COLA and nothing more. It was stacked high in discount aisles, promising a cheaper option than Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Poor families grabbed cases of it, knowing it would never quite taste the same as the real thing. The fizz was weak, the sweetness flat, but it was soda, and that was enough to make kids feel like they were part of the fun. Every once in a while, you got a can that seemed oddly metallic, but nobody poured it out. Parties, cookouts, and family nights featured those plain cans lined up on tables like silent guests. They were stripped of branding and glamour, but they delivered what mattered: a sugary, carbonated drink that felt like a treat. Kids rolled their eyes when friends brought over Pepsi, but at home, generic cola was good enough. To this day, people smile when they remember those plain cans, symbols of thrift and compromise. 60 items that once filled every grocery cart in America, gone without a trace. Some deserved it, some, you might argue, did not. Either way, that 1980s shopping trip looked nothing like what you see in the store today. If any of these brought back a memory, drop it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more of the things we all grew up with and never thought to question.